The trip to Paris was something I had dreamed about for a long time. As a young girl in my senior year of university, I always felt like I was left behind in my family, especially compared to my older sister Claire. She was always the one who received the most attention, celebrated for her achievements, while I stayed in the background. But I had accepted that. I kept quiet, focused on my own goals, and worked hard to make my way through school. One chilly autumn evening, I was sitting in my dorm room staring at my phone. I had just received a message from my mom. "We're planning a family trip to Paris for Christmas. Are you in? Your dad and I really want you to come." They didn't ask me if I could afford it. They just assumed I'd be there. My heart raced. I had worked so hard for this. I had saved up enough money to join them, and this trip was my chance to experience something extraordinary, something I had only dreamed of. I felt a wave of excitement. This would be my moment. My family, the ones I often felt overshadowed by, would finally see me as a part of the story too. I rushed to my bank, transferred the money my mom had requested, almost all of my savings. I looked at the remaining balance, feeling a pang of anxiety, but the excitement outweighed it. I could make more money in the future, but this trip, it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I had worked hard for this. This was my chance to create memories, to finally fit into the family picture in a way I had never been able to before. A week later, I was at the airport, practically buzzing with excitement. The trip was becoming a reality. I was going to Paris with my family. I imagined the excitement of walking through the streets of Paris, seeing the Eiffel Tower, eating croissants with my parents, and finally feeling like I belonged. I wanted to make the most of this time, especially with Claire, my older sister. She was always the golden child, the one everyone praised, and I was the quiet, overlooked one. But this time, I was going to be with them. This time, I was going to be a part of something. Or so I thought. When I arrived at my parents' house to prepare for the trip, something felt off. My mom greeted me with a smile, but it wasn't her usual warm, enthusiastic hug. My dad, too, was distant, avoiding eye contact as I walked in. The air felt heavy, thick with unspoken words. And then Claire and Mark arrived, always the center of attention. The moment they walked in, I could already feel my place in the family slipping away. They walked in as if they owned the space, with their usual stories about how successful their restaurant was, how busy they were, how everything was going so well. And I just stood there, feeling like a spectator in my own life. "Well, Sophie, are you sure you'll be able to afford the trip?" Claire asked, her tone laced with mockery. "It's about 3,000 euros per person, you know." I froze. 3,000 euros. That was all my savings, everything I had worked for, now being scrutinized as if it were nothing. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can handle it, Claire. Don't worry about me." But of course, Claire wasn't done. She raised an eyebrow, her smile widening. "Are you sure? I mean, I know it's a lot of money, but don't worry, if you're struggling, I can always help." I felt my face burn. I couldn't stand her condescending attitude, her need to remind me that I wasn't as successful as she was. "I'm sure," I said, trying to keep the sting out of my voice. Claire shrugged and turned to my parents, recounting the latest developments with their restaurant. She went on and on about the new wine list they'd created, the dishes they were working on, and how they were about to hire a new chef from Italy. I sat there, silently. As they all praised her for her hard work and entrepreneurship, I couldn't help but feel smaller and smaller. Mom joined in, beaming at Claire's success. "Sophie, you should really take notes from Claire. Look how entrepreneurial she is." My stomach churned. The words felt like daggers. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I worked, I would never be good enough. Claire was always the star, and I was just there. I was about to say something, maybe defend myself, maybe argue that I had worked just as hard, but I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. I had spent so many years just accepting this, just letting it happen, and now, for the first time, I didn't know how to fight back. Then Claire dropped the bombshell. "So, Sophie," she began, casually setting her fork down, "the trip to Paris is really expensive, and we've been talking about it, and we think it would be better if you didn't come. I mean, we've had to make some tough choices about the budget for the trip." I blinked, not understanding what I was hearing. My brain was still processing the words. "What do you mean?" I finally managed to ask. "Well," Claire said with a fake sympathetic tone, "the restaurant's been going through a rough patch, and we've had to adjust our budget. We think it's best if you sit this one out, Sophie. I know you've paid your share, but this is just how it is." My heart sank. I had worked so hard for this. Every penny I had earned was spent to make sure I could join them. And now, it meant nothing. My stomach twisted in knots as I looked at my parents. They didn't say anything. They just sat there, looking at their plates, as if they hadn't just stolen my dream from me. I tried to speak again, but my voice betrayed me. "I paid my share, 3,000 euros, all of my savings." My words felt small, weak. Mom, without looking up, sighed. "Sophie, family helps family. We need to be understanding. Claire and Mark are struggling right now. The least you can do is help them out." I wanted to scream, to ask them how they could do this to me, how they could take my money and then push me aside. But I didn't. I just stood there, numb. Claire glanced at me with a smirk, and I knew right then that I wasn't wanted. The trip wasn't for me. It never had been. It was for them, the golden child and her perfect husband. The trip was just another one of their perfect moments. I couldn't bring myself to stay there any longer. I quietly stood up, grabbed my things, and walked out of the room. My heart was heavy, my mind was racing, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let this go on any longer. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I stood frozen in the hallway outside the dining room, feeling like the walls were closing in on me. I had spent all these months working extra shifts, putting every penny of my savings into that trip, believing it was finally my chance to be part of the family's story. And now, it felt like everything I had worked for had been ripped away from me in a single dismissive sentence. I tried to process what Claire had said, but it didn't make sense. "We think it's best if you sit this one out." How could she say that? How could they all sit there pretending this was okay? The money I had saved up, my sweat, my late nights, my sacrifices, meant nothing to them. All of it was just an inconvenience to their plans. Mom and Dad were silent. They didn't defend me. They didn't even try to understand. They just let Claire and Mark make the decision for me, like I wasn't even part of the conversation. I wasn't a person to them. I was just a tool to get what they wanted. As I stood there, my thoughts raced. It wasn't the money that hurt the most. It wasn't about the trip to Paris anymore. What really stung was the realization that for my entire life, I had never truly mattered to them. Not in the way Claire mattered. Not in the way that her successes were celebrated while mine were ignored. I remember when I was younger, how every achievement of mine always seemed to be overshadowed by something Claire had done. I had learned to keep my head down and just accept it. When I graduated high school, I looked at my parents' faces and saw the same pride they had for Claire's accomplishments. But I also saw the disappointment that I hadn't done something more extraordinary. I had done my best, but it never seemed enough. And then there was Claire. Everything she did was seen as an achievement. She had always been the star of the family, winning awards, starting businesses, getting praised for everything. Meanwhile, I struggled to be noticed. It wasn't that I didn't try, it's just that it always felt like Claire was the one they expected to succeed. Even when I had good news to share, it felt like it was only important if it somehow linked back to her. That night, I felt it all come crashing down. I was tired of being invisible, tired of always being second, tired of being told to just accept my place. I had always put my family first, always supported Claire and their dreams, but I had nothing in return, not even a fair chance. not even a little bit of respect. As I stood there, I realized something. I was never going to get their approval, not unless I played their game. But I didn't want to play anymore. I was done. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity. I wasn't going to let them treat me like this. I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. It was time for me to make a decision that was about me for once. I went to the bank and started making arrangements. I wasn't going to let Claire and Mark take advantage of me anymore. I had inherited the house from my grandmother, the old place on Maple Street, and I had been letting them live there rent-free. It was my house, my inheritance, and I had been too afraid to stand up for myself. But no more. I wasn't going to let them use me as a safety net. I called a locksmith and arranged to have the locks changed. I knew they would be furious, but I didn't care. It was my house, and it was time to take it back. I wasn't going to let them make decisions for me anymore. When I showed up at the house that weekend, I didn't feel the excitement I had imagined. I didn't feel like I was about to join my family for a trip. Instead, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Claire and Mark were already there, packing for the trip, acting as if everything was normal. I stood in the doorway trying to hide my anger, but it was hard. Claire barely looked up when I walked in, too busy preparing for the trip. Mark glanced at me briefly, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and indifference. They didn't even seem to notice how much they had hurt me, how much they had taken from me. I waited until they were distracted, until they were packing up the last of their things. Then I went upstairs and began packing everything they had left behind, clothes, shoes, documents. I took it all, putting everything into boxes and suitcases. It wasn't about the stuff. It was about taking control back. It was about showing them that I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. I had the moving company come, and they packed up everything, charged me extra for the holiday service, but I didn't care. I drove them to a storage unit where I unloaded their things and locked everything away. By the time I finished, it was Christmas Eve. Claire and Mark had already left for the airport, and I was alone. I hadn't spoken to my parents since that night. I didn't even want to hear their excuses. I went to the locksmith next, and for the first time in my life, I felt powerful. I watched as he changed every lock in the house. The house that had once felt like a prison now felt like my sanctuary. I drove back to my dorm room, arriving just in time for the orphan Christmas celebration my friends were hosting. We were all students who couldn't afford to go home for the holidays, so we threw our own little party. I walked in, and my friend Lisa looked at me with surprise. "I thought you'd be in Paris by now," she said. I smiled faintly, accepting a cup of hot chocolate she offered me. "Change of plans," I said, sitting down on the couch. "But you know what? I think I'm exactly where I need to be." I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. For the first time, I didn't need their approval. I wasn't going to let my family's expectations dictate my life anymore. I had taken my first step toward reclaiming my own narrative, and it felt good. The next few days passed in a blur. I didn't go home. I didn't respond to any of the messages or calls from my parents. I just lived. It felt so strange, so freeing, to not constantly be thinking about what they might want from me or how I should be acting to fit into their perfect little picture. For the first time in years, I was making decisions solely for myself, not based on what anyone else expected or wanted from me. It was Christmas Day, and I was surrounded by my friends. None of us had family nearby, and none of us were heading home for the holidays. We made our own celebration, simple, low-key, but warm. We swapped stories, ate too much, and exchanged ridiculous gifts. I had never been so happy to just be with people who didn't judge me or expect anything from me. We weren't the family I had imagined. Celebrating together in Paris, sharing a Christmas toast with my parents, but we were family in a way. We understood each other, and that felt enough for me. But then, just as the evening was winding down, my phone buzzed. I had it on silent most of the time, but when I glanced down, I saw the name I had been avoiding. Mom. My stomach twisted, but I didn't pick up. Another buzz, and then another. I saw the notifications piling up, calls, texts, and missed messages from both of them, my parents and Claire. I opened one of the texts from Mom. It read, "Sophie, why aren't you picking up? Please, just talk to us. We need to understand what's going on. Your dad is really upset, and you need to explain yourself. This isn't how we should be handling things." I felt a pang of guilt. My heart sank, but I didn't let it control me, not this time. I had lived my life trying to make them happy, bending to their every expectation. But now I was living for me. I set the phone down and went back to my friends, but I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that I had done something wrong. Had I been too harsh? Maybe they really didn't understand the hurt they had caused. Maybe I should have tried harder to explain myself, but deep down, I knew that this wasn't just about the money. This was about the years of being overlooked, of being treated as an afterthought. This was about me finally standing up for myself, about taking back something I had lost. The following days were quiet. I stayed at my dorm, focused on schoolwork, and kept my phone off as much as I could. I couldn't bear to hear their voices, not after everything that had happened. The more I avoided them, the clearer it became. They were never going to change. They had always expected me to just accept what they gave me, to stay in the shadows and let Claire have the spotlight. But I wasn't going to do that anymore. I was done being invisible. Then came the call from Claire. I had been expecting it, but I hadn't anticipated just how angry she would be. My phone rang, and I hesitated before picking up. "What the hell, Sophie?" Claire's voice was sharp, filled with anger and disbelief. "You can't just do this to us. You've ruined everything. You've thrown your family out on the street, all because of a petty little grudge. How dare you? Do you know how much that house meant to us?" I stood there holding my phone, trying to steady my breath. "You mean my house, Claire? The one I've been letting you live rent-free for months while you run your business? That house?" I could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end. "You had no right to do this. You took everything from us. We were going to stay there, and now—" "You've been using me for years," I cut her off. "Not just for the house, but for everything. I've always been the backup, the afterthought. You never once considered what I needed, what I wanted. I was just there to help when things didn't go right for you." There was a long pause, a silence that felt suffocating. I could almost feel her disbelief radiating through the phone. "Sophie, you don't understand. We've been struggling. We needed your help." "You didn't need my help," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "You needed someone to bail you out, and I'm not doing it anymore. I'm done being your safety net. I'm done being your backup plan. I have my own life now, and I'm going to live it." "Is this really how it's going to be? Are you really going to cut us off like this?" Claire asked, her voice trembling with frustration. "After everything we've done for you?" I felt the sting of her words, but I didn't flinch. I had heard this too many times before. Everything we've done for you. What had they really done for me? They had ignored me. They had used me. They had always put Claire's needs ahead of mine. And I had been silent. I had let it happen, but no more. "Yes, Claire, this is how it's going to be," I said quietly. "I'm not the person I was anymore. I'm not the girl who would silently take all of this. I'm not going to live in your shadow anymore." Another pause. Then, in a voice that almost sounded broken, Claire said, "So that's it then? You won't even give us a chance to explain?" "Explain what?" I asked, my patience thinning. "There's nothing left to explain. You've had your chance. This isn't about me forgiving you. It's about me taking control of my own life." With that, I hung up the phone. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced before. But as I sat there in my dorm room, I realized something important. For the first time, I wasn't trying to prove myself to anyone. I wasn't waiting for anyone to acknowledge me, to accept me, or to understand me. I was living for myself. And that was enough. I didn't need them to get it. I didn't need their approval. For the first time in my life, I was free. The weeks following that conversation felt surreal. At first, I was flooded with a sense of relief. It was as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Finally, I was free. But the reality of my actions began to set in. As the days passed, the silence between me and my family grew deeper, heavier. I knew that the rift I had created was permanent, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to fully face the consequences of what I had done. I had expected the anger, the hurt, the backlash, but I hadn't anticipated the sense of isolation that came with it. The loneliness crept in slowly, almost imperceptibly. I didn't feel sad. I just felt empty. I had always been part of the family dynamic, even if I was just a quiet spectator. But now, I had severed that tie, and it wasn't something that could be undone. The first few days, my phone stayed quiet. No messages, no calls. It felt like I had disappeared completely from their lives. I thought about reaching out, maybe to explain, to apologize, but each time I picked up my phone, my thumb hovered over the screen and then pulled away. What was there to say? I had made my choice. I had taken a stand, and now I needed to stick to it. But then, on a chilly February afternoon, it happened. The phone call from my dad. His voice, when I answered, was strained, tight with emotion. "Sophie," he began, and I could tell he had been rehearsing this moment, trying to keep his composure. "We need to talk." I felt my heart skip a beat, but I stayed calm. "What's going on, Dad?" "I'm not calling to argue, Sophie," he continued, his voice thick. "I just want you to understand. This isn't just about you and Claire. This is about family. We are your family, and what you've done, well, it's tearing us apart. Your mother, she's devastated. And I don't know how to fix this." His words cut deep, more than I expected. Part of me wanted to break down and give in, but the other part, the stronger part, held firm. I had spent years being the one who always gave in, always kept the peace, but now I wasn't going to be the one who folded. Not this time. "I didn't do this to hurt anyone," I replied quietly, my voice steady. "But you need to understand. I've been hurt for years, Dad. I've been ignored, used, and taken for granted. This isn't just about the house or the money or the trip. It's about years of being invisible to you and Mom. It's about me finally standing up for myself. For once in my life, I'm choosing me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear Dad's breath, steady and slow, as if he were processing my words, trying to make sense of them. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer, but I could hear the pain. "I don't know what to say, Sophie. I really don't. I never meant for you to feel that way. You know how proud we are of you, right? But this isn't how families work. You can't just shut us out like this." I felt a lump in my throat, but I fought it back. "You're right. I can't just shut you out. But I needed to do this, Dad. For me. I'm not asking you to understand. I just want you to respect that I made this choice." There was another long pause, and then Dad said, I don't know what to say. We'll figure this out, Sophie. We'll try, okay?" I didn't know if we would, but I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "Okay, Dad. I'll be here." We hung up soon after, and I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't a miracle. but it was something. It was a tiny crack in the wall that had built up between us. Maybe this wasn't the end, after all. But just as I thought things might be starting to shift, I got a message from Claire. It wasn't a simple text. It was long enough to make my hands shake as I read through it. "I can't believe you did this. You've ruined everything. This is not just about the house, Sophie. It's about family. About us. What kind of sister does this to her own family? How could you betray us like this? Do you think I've had it easy? Do you think this restaurant is just a dream we can walk away from? You've always been jealous of me. You've always wanted to tear me down. Well, congratulations. You've succeeded. You've torn our family apart. I hope you're proud of yourself." I didn't respond right away. In fact, I didn't respond at all. What was there to say? She was angry. She was hurt. But she didn't get it. She couldn't see past her own pain to understand mine. I set the phone down and took a deep breath. It was hard not to feel guilty, not to second-guess my actions, but I reminded myself that this was the right decision. For the first time in my life, I was standing my ground. I wasn't going to let Claire's words, or anyone else's, make me feel small. I had my life to live, and I had to do it on my terms. I didn't hear from them again for a few weeks. The silence was both peaceful and suffocating. It was like they had given up on me and I had given up on them. There were no calls from Mom or Dad, no texts from Claire, just a vast emptiness. But in that emptiness, I found something I hadn't realized I was missing: myself. I had spent so many years trying to make others proud, trying to please them, trying to fit into their mold. But now I wasn't trying anymore. I wasn't trying to please anyone. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like freedom. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I had taken back control of my life, and that was worth more than any family vacation, any trip to Paris, or any house. It was worth everything. Weeks turned into months, and the silence stretched on. At first, I felt empowered by the distance I had put between myself and my family. I didn't have to answer to anyone, didn't have to explain myself to anyone. But as time passed, that silence began to feel heavier. The initial rush of liberation faded, and in its place, a sense of uncertainty took root. What was I really doing? Had I made the right choice? I told myself I didn't need their approval. I told myself I didn't need them to understand. But the truth was, deep down, I missed them. I missed the moments we had shared, the rare times when I felt seen or cared for. I thought back to my childhood, to when things were simpler, before everything became so complicated. There had been moments, small, fleeting moments, when I felt loved. But they were always overshadowed by the constant comparison to Claire, the constant feeling of being less than. The quiet was oppressive at times. I would sit in my dorm room, scrolling through social media, watching the perfect lives of everyone else, families celebrating holidays together, vacations in exotic locations, perfect family photos in front of Christmas trees. And then there was my feed, my empty feed. My family was absent from it, as I was from theirs. The truth I hadn't fully realized until then was that cutting them off wasn't as simple as I had imagined. It wasn't as clean or as satisfying as I had hoped. I had expected to feel triumphant, like I had won some battle. But in reality, I felt more alone than I ever had before. But despite that loneliness, I refused to give in. I refused to let their expectations define me again. I wasn't going back to the place where I was constantly made to feel like I didn't matter. I wasn't going to fall into the same old patterns of silence and submission. I had made my choice, and now I had to live with it, for better or for worse. Then came the unexpected call. It was late one evening, just as I was heading out to meet friends. My phone rang, and I didn't recognize the number. My stomach tightened. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. "Sophie?" It was my dad. His voice was tentative, almost unsure. It's Dad. I froze. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. After all this time, after everything that had happened, here he was, calling me. I felt a mix of anger, hurt, and confusion. "Yeah," I said, my voice a little too sharp. "What's going on, Dad?" "We need to talk," he said. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, and I don't know how to fix things. I just don't want you to think we don't care about you. Your mom, she's been crying every day, Sophie. She's heartbroken." I closed my eyes, trying to process his words. The anger that had fueled me in the past few months suddenly felt less powerful. I took a deep breath before responding. "Dad, I didn't do this to hurt anyone. I did it because I had to, because I was drowning, and I couldn't breathe anymore. I had to stand up for myself." "I get it," he said softly, his voice full of regret. "I do, but I don't want you to feel like you have to go through this alone. We're still your family. We may have screwed up, but we're still here." I stayed quiet for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Was it really possible for things to change? Could my family actually see me for who I was and not just as the backup to Claire's brilliance? "I don't know if I can just go back, Dad," I said quietly. "It's not that simple. It's not just about the house or the money or the trip. It's about how I've felt my whole life. I can't just forget that. I can't just pretend like nothing happened." "I understand," he replied. "I don't want you to forget it. I just want to start over if you'll let us. Maybe we could try again. Slowly. No pressure, no expectations. Just family." His words hung in the air, and for a moment I felt something shift. The anger and resentment that had been building inside me for so long started to wane. I wasn't ready to forgive them entirely, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward, a way to rebuild. I wasn't sure how it would look, but the idea of trying to find a way back to them at my own pace, didn't feel as impossible as it had before. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice quieter now, more thoughtful. "But I need time." "I get it. We'll give you the time you need. Just know that we love you, Sophie." I didn't know if I believed him, not fully, but it was a start. It was a crack in the wall that had been between us for so long. Maybe it wasn't too late to fix things. Maybe there was hope for us yet. After the call ended, I sat on my bed staring at the phone. I felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. I wasn't ready to jump back into the chaos of family dynamics, but I knew that I couldn't keep running forever. At some point, I would have to face them again. At some point, I would have to decide if I was willing to try again. But right now, I have my own life to live. I had my own identity, my own journey, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. No matter what happened with my family, no matter how much I missed them or longed for things to be different, I knew that I had finally started to live for myself, and that was something I had never done before. In the end, that was the most important lesson I had learned. Sometimes standing up for yourself means letting go. It means stepping away even if it hurts, so you can find your own path. And no matter how much pain you go through, no matter how difficult the road, the freedom that comes with owning your own life is worth everything. It was worth the distance. Months passed since that phone call from Dad, and little by little things began to shift. Slowly, but surely, I started to rebuild myself, piece by piece. The first few weeks were filled with uncertainty. But as the silence between me and my family stretched, I found comfort in the space I had created for myself. I didn't know if it was the right thing, but I knew it was the only thing that had given me peace in years. I kept my distance, but I also kept an open heart. I wasn't ready to return to the way things were before, but I no longer saw my family as an enemy. I wasn't angry anymore, just numb in a way. I realized that no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't force them to change overnight. But I could change, and that was enough for me. Then one Sunday afternoon, a surprise came. It was a text from Claire, simple, direct. "Sophie, I'm sorry. Can we talk?" For a long moment, I just stared at it, the words flashing on my screen. I wasn't sure what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave things as they were, but another part of me, the part that had spent so much time longing for connection, felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something. I took a deep breath and replied, "Okay, let's talk." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop a few days later. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I had to go. If anything, it was for me, so I could finally get the closure I needed, whether I was ready to forgive or not. When I saw Claire, she looked different. Her posture was less confident, more tentative. Her eyes were filled with the same mixture of regret and pain I had seen in my dad's voice months ago. We sat down, and for the first time in ages, it felt like we were equals. Claire started, her voice soft, almost apologetic. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how I treated you, how we treated you, and I get it now. I've been so wrapped up in my own life that I didn't see what I was doing to you. I'm sorry, Sophie." I let her words sink in. My heart clenched a little, but I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sure I was ready to forgive completely, but I was willing to listen. "I can't pretend I'm not hurt," I said quietly, my voice steady. "But I'm willing to try. Maybe we can start over. Not as the sisters we used to be, but as the people we've become." Claire nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I'd like that," she whispered. In that moment, I knew we weren't going back to what we had before. Things would never be the same, but that was okay. Sometimes, things had to fall apart for something new to take shape. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first made the decision to distance myself. And neither was Claire. We both had scars, but we also had a chance to heal. Together, but on our own terms. It wouldn't be easy, but it was a beginning. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. I had fought for my voice, for my place in the world, and now, for the first time, I was allowing myself to move forward, no longer burdened by the weight of expectations, but free to shape my own path. And that freedom was more than enough. Story 2. Everyone except my kid received gifts from my parents. "Grandma, do you hate me?" she whimpered, her eyes watering. "Gifts are for children who deserve them," my mother added with a sly smile. "The child of your sister is truly family." I just said, "I understand." We went away, vowing never to talk again. However, a few days later, in a peaceful neighborhood of Greenwich, Connecticut, my parents were standing in front of me, sobbing. The Bradley mansion stood out amid the white colonial-style residences. Seasonal flowers flourished in the well-kept front yard, and the entrance's stone path evoked the grandeur of a movie set. The Bradley family has lived in this $2,500,000 estate for more than 30 years. A little girl was watering the flowers in that garden. 8-year-old Lily Morrison attended St. Mary's Elementary School in the 2nd grade. The grown-ups in her immediate vicinity were won over by her thoughtful demeanor and kind, dark eyes. She was visiting her grandparents' house after school as usual. Day after day, the little girl cared for the garden, while the neighbors observed with affection. "I appreciate you tending the flowers for Grandma, Lily." It was Amy Morrison, Lily's mother, who spoke from the doorway. She oversaw research and development at a large pharmaceutical business at the age of 35. She had adopted Lily 8 years prior, and despite her sweet disposition, she had inner strength. She also assumed responsible for her parents' $3,000 monthly rent support and health insurance premiums. She didn't regret her decision to not inherit the family real estate company, even if it left her relationship with her parents fragile. Mom. Today I made Grandpa's favorite cookies. I learned how to make it from Mrs. Johnson. The smell of chocolate chip cookies filled the paper bag Lily proudly held. Recently, her favorite activity had become taking culinary lessons from her elderly neighbor. How lovely. Grandpa is going to be very pleased. Michael, Amy's husband, was standing behind her as she grinned. At the age of 37, he was the proprietor of an IT business that provided a steady income of more than $300,000 a year to his family. He had always respected his wife's choices and treasured the promise they made to walk hand in hand during their wedding at St. Mary's Church. Robert and Diana were at the house, in the sitting room going over paperwork. As Bradley real estate owners, they were always concerned about the company's future. Their biggest struggle in life was passing on their $5 million yearly income firm to the next generation. The succession question kept these two up at night since they valued appearances and tradition. Their younger daughter, Caitlin, carried the weight of these expectations, having gone from being a lawyer to heading the family company. Bookkeeping. Despite her arrogant and ostentatious demeanor, she had gained her parents' confidence. She poured herself into her career with passion, trying to live up to her parents' expectations even after her divorce. Though a little spoilt from living up to his grandparents' expectations, Caitlin's 7-year-old son, Jacob, attended Greenwich Academy, which is regarded as the most prominent private school in Greenwich. Maybe he was under too much pressure from everyone around him. "Look at these new contracts, Mother." The LaSalle business meeting proceeded smoothly. Diana started going over the papers Caitlin had given her. Both parents favored printed paperwork, even in this digital age. Caitlin smiled understandingly as she accepted her parents' traditional methods. The hidden agenda behind that smile went unnoticed. The light from the windows gradually grew softer as twilight drew near. With a contented look on her face, Lily had completed watering the remaining garden flowers. She received a friendly wave from local housewives on their way back from Whole Foods Market. When Amy saw her daughter Grenache draped in Christmas lights in December, she felt a calm sense of joy. At the Bradley mansion, preparations were in progress for an extravagant celebration. Inheritable stockings hung above the fireplace, and the Christmas tree, which reached the roof of the living room, was tastefully decorated with antique decorations. "Can I also hang this wreath, Grandma?" Lily handled her homemade wreath with care, which she had made during the Christmas workshop at St. Mary's Church. It had a straightforward beauty that was adorned with pine cones and ribbons. "Indeed, we should hang it at the door." Diana checked the arrangement of pricey decorations that she had bought from upscale department stores and replied dismissively. Lily's innocent grin gave her a brief twinge of remorse, but she immediately forced it away. Family members started to arrive as darkness approached. Amy and Michael showed up with Whole Foods premium wine. Caitlin and Jacob showed up with armloads of goodies wrapped in flesh. Happy Christmas! At the door, Lily welcomed everyone and distributed handcrafted Christmas cards. In adorable calligraphy, the cards thoughtfully conveyed thanks over the previous year. 365 days of a small girl's affection were encapsulated in those words. Daily visits, watering flowers, and making cookies. Robert was studying the company's financial statistics in the living room, his eyes fixed on the fireplace. There were times when he seemed concerned. However, it was a family dinner gathering tonight. He made the decision to put business matters off until tomorrow. Should we go to Diana's Voice for dinner? The family gathered around the beautiful dinner table under the crystal chandelier. Roast turkey and handmade gratin were among the colorful foods on display, salad of seafood, desserts from the fancy restaurant that were ordered. On the table, La Scowl also attracted notice. "Once again, Mother, what a great meal." Diana nodded contentedly beside Caitlin as she talked. Jacob was talking eagerly about his newest gaming system. Lily ate her lunch quietly next to them, looking forward to the gift-giving. It was time to exchange gifts after supper. With a mound of colorful paper-wrapped presents, the entire family gathered around the fireplace beneath the tree. It came into being. First, let's talk about Jacob. The gift-giving started at Robert's signal. One by one, Jacob's gifts were unveiled. The latest game console, premium brand, children's apparel, and educational tablet seats appeared with each opening. Lily eagerly anticipated her grandparents' presence, daily visits, time spent together, and shared grins as she waited for her turn. Grandpa and Grandma must, of course. However, Lily's name was never called as gifts were given out one after the other. The atmosphere in the room slowly became heavier. Amy's face stiffened, and Michael could feel the eerie vibe. "Grandmother?" In the quiet chamber came a little voice. Lily's eyes gleamed with big tears. "Do you despise me?" The atmosphere of the room was frozen by the trembling voice. Jacob was still engrossed in his new game console, but Caitlin had a profound look on her face, not caring. Amy was about to go up to her kid when Diana's icy voice interrupted. "Gifts are given to worthy kids." Diana smiled elegantly and took a drink of tea before continuing. "After all, my sister's child is truly family." Like ice swords, those words sliced through the room. The blood drained from Amy's face. Michael's hand was clenched. The only sound amid the deep quiet is the ticking of the clock. Outside the window, spooky, swirling shadows were created on the walls by the flickering fireplace flames. Silently, Christmas snow had started to fall. I can see why Amy sounded amazingly composed. "We will never again be involved." Amy got to her feet and picked up the sobbing Lily. The three of them went softly towards the door after Michael put his arms around his wife and daughter's shoulders. "Hold on, Amy." It was too late when Robert called out. The door slammed shut, signaling the end of the evening. The snow outside was deepening. The white snow in the back seat was lit by car headlights. Lily's hands were still shaking as she held onto her handcrafted card. There, the words to my dear grandmother were still tenderly inscribed. Greenwich was still in the midst of Christmas chaos. St. Mary's Church was filled with hymns, and homes' windows were leaking warm light. However, there was only silence in the Morrison family's vehicle. From time to time, Michael looked in the rearview mirror at his daughter in the back seat. Amy just held her husband's hand tightly as she faced forward in silence. The Morrison family's dining table was surrounded by a somber atmosphere on the morning of December. Michael and Amy had been talking about what to do all night. Lily was still in her upstairs room sleeping. "I've made up my mind," Amy spoke gently, but with powerful determination. "I am ceasing all assistance to my parents." Michael held his wife's hand tenderly. They had been covering her parents' high medical insurance premiums and $3,000 in rent support each month. Every year, the total surpassed $50,000. "I concur. This support has been taken for granted by your parents." Grace Morrison, Michael's mother and president of the St. Mary's Church Women's Association, called to support this choice. She called the neighbors right away after learning about what had happened the night before. "Staying in that house is not necessary. Use our vacation house, please." A short distance from the posh neighborhood of Greenwich, Grace's vacation house provided a calm and serene setting. Amy's family greatly benefited from her offer. Amy met with accountant Tom Watson that afternoon to discuss ending her parents' support. Longtime friend Tom was aware of Bradley Real Estate's financial predicament. Over the last 6 months, maintenance costs have skyrocketed, and some contract payments don't seem to be flowing naturally. Being aware of her father's attention to detail, Amy gazed at the papers that were signed by him. The signature seemed strange for some reason. Naturally, Lily started avoiding going to her grandparents' house. She used to stop by their house every day on her way home from St. Mary's Elementary School. Slowly, the flowers in the garden faded. The town was enveloped in bitter cold as January rolled in. Amy's family had begun their new life in Grace's vacation home. In the spacious garden, Lily carefully tended to a new flower bed, and on weekends, Grace would visit to enjoy gardening together. "Grandma, do you think these rose seedlings will bloom in spring?" Grace smiled gently at Lily's question. "Like you, they will undoubtedly blossom beautifully." Her wounded heart began to heal. Little by little, however, unsettling rumors began spreading around the Bradley family. Sarah Johnson, who lived nearby, found Caitlin's recent behavior suspicious. "That girl shopping in New York again last week, she bought several new luxury brand bags. Her lavish lifestyle, even as the family's accounting manager, caught many residents' attention." In February, Jim Clark, a veteran employee of Bradley Real Estate, requested early retirement. His sudden decision after over 30 years of service caused turmoil within the company. "There's a problem." David Stern, the legal counsel for Michael's company, said there are rumors in the real estate industry about unclear transactions at Bradley Real Estate. As March began, more concerning developments surfaced. One day, Amy received a letter. The sender was Martha Collins, former accounting director of Bradley Real Estate. "Miss, I need to speak with your father." In the letter, Martha suggested serious concerns about the company's accounting practices. Since Miss Caitlin took over accounting, there have been increasing transactions. I cannot verify. The day after reading that letter, Amy drove to her parents' house to check on her father. There, she witnessed unfamiliar men in suits visiting the company. Morning newspapers reported the start of a tax investigation into Bradley Real Estate. Authorities had launched a large-scale investigation following an internal whistleblower report. Amy. Something terrible has happened. Michael had received a call first thing in the morning from his contact at the tax office. There's strong suspicion your sister has embezzled about $5 million over the past 3 years. That afternoon, Caitlin disappeared from the company. "Mom!" Caitlin left without saying anything, receiving a panic-stricken call from Diana. Amy held her breath. Her sister had withdrawn a large sum of cash and vanished, leaving behind her 7-year-old son, Jacob. As the investigation proceeded, shocking facts came to light one after another, moving real estate contract payments to secret accounts, padding maintenance costs, and pocketing the difference freely using company seals and bank books by exploiting her parents' trust, completely controlling online banking by taking advantage of her elderly parents' digital illiteracy. One Friday evening, police arrested Caitlin at JFK International Airport as she attempted to flee the country. Why? Why would she do this? Robert held his head in his hands at the police station. The company's reputation was in ruins, with total liabilities potentially exceeding $10 million. Diana broke down, crying at home. Outside the window, the flowers Lily had once tenderly cared for swayed sadly, receiving no one's attention. Amy silently watched the news in Grace's vacation home living room. Michael was collaborating with police assisting the digital forensic investigation. That night, Lily wrote a small prayer in her diary. "Please don't let Mom feel upset, and please don't let Jacob feel lonely by himself." In the Greenwich police station interview room, Caitlin Bradley quietly confirmed her misdeeds. Her speech had barely a hint of her prior arrogance. Her premium brand suit had been changed with police-given work clothes, and her immaculate makeup had faded as the inquiry advanced. Shocking information continued coming to light. The first deception began 3 years ago, straining to pay alimony following her divorce. Caitlin began embezzling little amounts. However, her subsequent addiction to a luxurious lifestyle led her to greater crimes. Of the $3 million in contract payments from business partners, $500,000 went to private accounts. The investigators discreetly took notes of her testimony. Meanwhile, at Bradley Real Estate headquarters, the corporation faced its largest crisis since its foundation. At this pace, we'll have to let rid of all properties. James Foster, designated as bankruptcy trustee, declared with a grim frown. Employees glanced at each other uneasily. In the middle of this, something unexpected started to happen. The cops received an album from a neighbor, Mrs. Johnson. It was a collection of pictures that chronicled Lily's everyday activities. Every day, that youngster visited their home. Dated pictures of Lily taking care of the garden, baking cookies with her parents, and going to the hospital with her grandparents were meticulously documented in the album. Snow or rain, she didn't skip a day. The footage from security cameras was then examined. Records show that visits continued for 367 days without a single day being missed. According to the police technician, Lily always went to her grandparents' house, including on New Year's Eve when she had a flu-like temperature. The Women's Association of St. Mary's Church also provided testimony. Lily would pray for them every Sunday after church. Quietly, Pastor Michael O'Connor carried on with his testimony. She would often plead, "Please let Grandpa and Grandma stay healthy." It resembled the sincere supplication of an angel. Grace's vacation house was visited by Robert and Diana on the morning of April 20th. The two appear more worn out than ever. Their opulent outfits had been swapped out for more modest everyday attire, and Diana's pricey rings were no longer on her fingers. "We must speak with you, Amy." Robert turned to his daughter and wept. Diana went on in a shaky voice. "We made a terrible mistake." Lily's unwavering devotion for the child. "We stepped on it." Without holding anything back, the two started talking the complete truth. Their too high standards for Caitlin, their fixation with bloodlines, their fear about the company's succession, and most importantly, their stupidity in failing to see the real gem in front of them. She was there every day. "But Diana started crying. "We just followed Caitlin's instructions." As she listened, Amy felt a range of complex emotions swirling in her chest: sadness, anger, and an odd feeling of freedom. Just then, tiny footsteps came from the upper floor. "Grandfather?" Grandma Lily, still dressed in her school uniform, descended the stairs. For a minute, the room's mood froze. But Lily's next move went above and beyond what anyone had anticipated. She went directly to her grandparents and gave them a tender embrace with her tiny arms. "Don't weep. I want to forgive you." There was silence in the room at that moment. In the kitchen, Grace discreetly touched her fingertips to her eyes. Michael sighed deeply as he looked out the window. Amy silently made her choice while putting her palm on her daughter's back. "Let's discuss what comes next, Dad and Mom. We all together." Outside the window, gentle spring sunlight poured into the room. Lily had planted some flowers and they were slowly starting to blossom. That night, Amy spoke privately with her mother-in-law about the start of a new season. "I agree with your decision, Grace." Silently, Grace, who had been keeping an eye on everything, went on. "But from now on, let us help to the talk of forming a new type of family proceeded until late into the night. The next day, Amy met with lawyer David Stern and began making concrete plans for the future. A team of experts would be needed to rebuild the company with your experience and connections, rebuilding the company as possible." Amy nodded gently at David's comments. Her expertise at the pharmaceutical industry could help revive the family business in unforeseen ways. Then came Caitlin's first trial. The courtroom was filled with a melancholy mood. The defendant is hereby condemned to 7 years in jail. As the judge's voice boomed forth, Caitlin lowered her head solemnly. Jacob, her kid, had already started a new life with his father, who was divorced, when she walked out of the courtroom. Amy received a message from Caitlin. "I'm so sorry, sis." Her comments had the ring of sincere regret for the first time. At evening, Amy's relatives and parents gathered on the terrace of Grace's holiday house. As she offered steaming tea, Grace remarked, "It's a new beginning." Lily was irrigating the fresh flowers. Her form appeared to be a representation of hope. "We still have a lot of things to make up for." Robert's statements were met with silent nods from everyone. Greenwich was decked out with Christmas lights once more. Over the last year, Grace's vacation house has undergone significant change. Seasonal flowers grew across the lawn, and the old reception room had been transformed into a family living room. May I assist you with decorating the tree, Mom? On these decorations, which were created in the St. Mary's Church workshop, Lily carefully held fresh ornaments. The words, "Thank you to family," were meticulously inscribed. Naturally. Let's decorate together before Grandma and Grandpa arrive. Amy gave her daughter's head a gentle pat. Lily had become even gentler in the last year. In the meanwhile, a significant shift had occurred in the lives of Diana and Robert. Their opulent lifestyle had diminished, and they were forced to relocate from their spacious mansion in the affluent neighborhood to a small flat. The loan is still only partially repaid. Their humble life had given Diana new perspectives. She began participating in volunteer activities at St. Mary's Church every Wednesday, and these events eventually impacted her values. The worth of the heart is not the same as the worth of goods. Her writings are full of introspection and fresh insights. Robert persisted in his frantic attempts to restore the business with Amy's assistance. Even though the total debt was still high, they were setting up a new management system. Slowly, they might envision a way to pay it back. I'm extremely grateful for your managerial talents. The full impact of his daughter's presence was finally sinking in. Amy was using her expertise, working for a pharmaceutical business, to improve the company's management structure and digitalization. Michael also donated his IT company's knowledge, helping design a new real estate management system. The couple's cooperation in rebuilding the family firm gave the workers hope. This new family was lovingly guarded by Grace. Sometimes it takes the most courage to forgive people you love. Every member of the family found great resonance in her words. Another new custom was the monthly family gathering on the first Sunday. Despite occasional disagreements, these two turned into chances to strengthen family ties. I want to launch a new project next month. Robert suggested allocating a portion of the business's earnings to a fund that would assist adoption. I want to share what we learned from Lily with the rest of society. Amy's eyes began to heat up at those words. In prison, Caitlin was earnestly working on her rehabilitation program during her parents' visits. For the first time, she apologized sincerely. Our family was shattered by my envy and selfishness. She had started to confront the actual nature of her behavior through counseling. Jacob, her son, and his father were leading a steady life. His once pampered disposition had softened, and he was slowly becoming more accepting of the new surroundings. Can I go visit him? Occasionally? Lily's casual comments affected the entire household. A child learnt the value of forgiveness from the innocence of their heart. For this day, Lily had prepared a unique present, a handcrafted picture album. It meticulously captured recollections over the last year, images of moving day, church volunteer activities, family gatherings, loving gardening. I'd want to create many more memories. Everyone gave Lily's comments a soft grin. The family started cooking Christmas supper around dark. The table was set with warm delicacies prepared with everyone's consideration, however not as opulently as the feast from the previous year. Let's say a prayer. Everyone silently closes their eyes at Grace's comments. We are grateful for our awareness and forgiving hearts, Lord. The chamber resonated softly with our man's voice. Snow had started to fall lightly outside the window. Pay attention to Lily's voice. Everybody gazed out the window. The garden's trees were lighted with tiny lights. It was a Christmas surprise that Michael had arranged in secret. It's like a starry sky. Diana teared up at the sight. There was a heartwarming beauty there that couldn't compare to the former luxurious decorations. Together, let's establish new family customs going forward. Amy's remarks caused everyone to nod. The room was filled with the perfume of Grace's freshly cooked apple pie. The family's faces were encased in serene joy as they gathered around the table. That was a year ago tonight. No one could have envisioned such a lovely scenario. So this is what genuine bliss is. Robert silently nodded at Diana's whisper. Their faces were filled with both the glow of fresh optimism and profound grief. From this day forward, the Bradley and Morrison families were going to take a new step. It was the beginning of a lengthy journey to repair damaged hearts and reweave real relationships. The light reflected in Lily's little eyes shined subtly and unmistakably like optimism for the future as she stood at the window and watched the snow continue to fall. Story 3. I was made to pay my parents' flat rent, letting my sister live for nothing. After 2 years, I realized that I was the apartment's owner after finding certain documentation, so I requested my money back. And then, I'm Janice, and I'm 20 years old. Making it on my own had always been my goal. When I got admitted to college on a full scholarship, it felt like everything was finally coming into place. My tuition was fully paid by the scholarship, but I still needed a place to live. My mother then thought of what appeared to be the ideal remedy. One evening, as we sat in our kitchen, she said, "I've been thinking. Do you remember the flat your grandmother gave me 4 years ago? How about renting it? I'll provide you a competitive pricing, far less than what you would spend elsewhere in that region." I looked into it, and she wasn't telling lies. She was requesting rent that was about half of what comparable flats were charging. It seems to be obvious, despite the fact that I knew I would have to find employment to pay for it. A valid leasing agreement must be signed. Pulling out paperwork she had prepared, Mom persisted. I always do things by the book. Within a week, I'd secured a work in a cafe near college. Although it wasn't very glamorous, I was able to make ends meet between job hours and school. Although I was usually fatigued, it felt fantastic to be managing things alone. My daily schedule was straightforward yet rigorous. Get up, attend courses, and then go directly to work. Arrive home late. I studied till I lost the ability to see. Repeat. I was making it work even though it wasn't easy. At least I believed I was. Up until that Thursday night when everything was different. I have a clear memory of it. I just got off a really difficult shift at the cafe. Before starting my schoolwork, all I wanted to do was lay down on my couch and perhaps watch some pointless TV. However, I froze in my tracks as I opened the door to my apartment and saw my sister Anna sprawled on my couch as if she owned the space. 2 enormous luggage were alongside her, and she was looking through her phone entirely at ease. "Why are you here?" Still standing at the doorway, I asked. She looked up from her phone just a little. Hi. You and I are moving in together." "It's okay," Mom said. I took out my phone right away and contacted my mother. I waited for her to pull me up, my hands trembling. "What's going on, Mom? She's moving in here, according to Anna. Will she cover the rent?" To her answer. Hit me like a smack in the face. "Are you insane, Janice? What sort of foolish inquiries are you making? Anna is obviously not making her rent payments. She will live there for free, and you will continue to pay what you have been paying." "What?" "It's unfair. If she's living here, she should pay half the rent." My mother's voice got stern. When she wasn't going to schedule any arguments, she employed that tone. "Janice, pay close attention to me. I'm the owner of the flat, and I make the financial decisions. You may leave at any time if you don't like it." I looked at local apartment ads after my mother's ultimatum, but everything was much beyond my budget. So I swallowed my pride and accepted the situation. Living with my sister was like having a whirlwind as a flatmate since she had never learnt to be respectful of other people. Lights were burning in the living room, kitchen, hallway, and other vacant rooms every morning when I woke up. Every night she would leave them on. "Please remember to switch off the lights when you leave a room, Anna." I tried to speak at a level voice when I asked one morning. "The bill for electricity. Stop being so stiff, please." Without even looking up from her phone, she interrupted me. The lights were only the beginning, so it's not really that big of an issue. Her bathroom habits were the true nightmare. Anna would spend literally hours locked in there, taking countless showers and talking on the phone with her pals. The sound of rushing water became the soundtrack to my anxieties. I heard her laughing and splashing through the bathroom door one evening as I was getting ready for a test. For over 2 hours, the water had been running. "Hello, Anna." I knocked on the door and yelled. "You've spent a lifetime inside. Are you aware of the amount of water you're wasting?" Her voice returned, hushed but gratingly happy. "Chill out, sis. Today is my spa day. I can do whatever I want," Mom says. I went back to my room and tried to concentrate on my textbooks while mentally estimating how much these spa days would probably cost. It had been 3 hours before the water finally ceased. I almost passed out the day the power bill came in. It was twice as much as what I typically pay. I was worried how I was going to pay for this on top of my other bills as I stood in the kitchen and looked at the figures. I addressed Anna that night. She was viewing movies on her phone at high volume while splayed out on the couch with her feet up on the coffee table. "We must discuss the utility bills." I held up the paper while I spoke. "They've doubled since you moved in. Do you need to be more mindful of how much power and water you use, or what?" With a sneer on her lips, she glanced up at last. "Or you'll need to find somewhere else to reside." She took notice of that. Her eyes narrowed as she straightened her posture. "I'm sorry," Mom clearly said. "I can do whatever I want here. Remember, you're meant to serve me." That was Mom's statement. I felt something crack within of me. Everything I had been suppressing, including my aggravation and the injustice of the situation, came rushing out. "Gather your belongings." My voice was unnaturally calm as I spoke. "Now go out. This flat isn't yours," she screamed and leapt to her feet. "It's my responsibility to pay for it. And you're heading out now, I ask?" We were at a standstill for a while. Then, while muttering obscenities, Anna began flinging her belongings into her luggage. While packing, she banged things over, slammed drawers, and made as much noise as she could. She finally turned to face me one more time, spit out, and dragged her baggage to the door. "This is something you will regret." Then she slammed the door so forcefully that the windows shook as she rushed out. My phone began to ring just as I was beginning to catch my breath. The screen showed Mom's name. Even though I knew this was coming, I responded with trembling hands. "What are you doing, in your opinion?" I had to keep the phone away from my ear since her voice was so loud. "To throw your sister out? Who do you think you are?" "Mom!" She has been silenced. "You were not entitled," she was essentially yelling. "Right now, gather your belongings and leave. Do you hear me? I'm going to double your rent unless you leave. You have an option." I finally let out the rage that had been simmering inside of me for weeks. "What do you know?" I retorted, my voice shaking with rage. "I would rather pay 5 times as much somewhere else than deal with this absurd circumstance for another minute." I hung up before she could answer. I grabbed my luggage from beneath the bed and barged into my bedroom. I began tossing clothes into it without even folding them. I gathered my belongings about the flat as my vision was obscured by angry tears. I started taking out my textbooks as soon as I reached the bookcase. My irate motions caused them to slip in my hands, and they were uncomfortable and heavy. I slammed the bookshelf door shut with all my strength, frustrated. It happened at that moment. On top of the bookshelf, a number of heavy volumes that I had not seen fell, striking me in the head. Simply ideal. I looked at the books that had fallen and touched my head. I saw something flutter to the ground at that moment. One of them had dropped a piece of paper out. I stooped to pick it up, supposing it was just a misplaced bookmark or an old receipt, but my heart stopped as I unfurled it. The top of the plainly photocopied legal paper was still readily readable. The words, "Last Will and Testament," were bolded. There was my grandmother's name and the date of her death, which was only a few months away. As I read through it, my hands began to shake. It was in black and white there. My mother and Anna received money from my grandma. Additionally, I had been paying rent on this flat, which had been handed to me. Recollections flooded back, and I fell to the ground, the wheel still gripped in my shaking hands. Now, Like parts of a puzzle I had been too blind to see, everything began to make terrible sense. I could still hear my mother's voice from 4 years ago, just following Grandma's burial. I recalled listening my mom make her news while seated in our living room with family members. Mom had told me she had left everything to me. She spoke in a steady, persuasive voice. All the money and all the property. She wanted everything to be handled by me. No one questioned her since she had glanced around the room and met everyone's eyes with such honesty. I recalled hesitantly raising my hand, like a schoolgirl hesitant to pose a foolish query. "But why didn't our grandmother leave us anything, Mum?" To myself and Anna, I will never forget the look she gave me, that mix of sympathy and annoyance. "These things are tricky, Janice. We must honor the choice made by your grandma. You just must come to terms with it, embrace it." Now those words have a different impact. In the months that followed, I saw Anna abruptly start wearing high-end clothing and the newest iPhone. While I stayed at home and worked a summer job at the neighborhood grocery store, Mom and Anna went on a shopping spree in Paris and Milan as part of a mother-daughter bonding vacation that lasted 2 weeks. I now realized how much money they were spending carelessly. The shopping trips, the trip to Europe, and all of the pricey presents that Anna had inherited. They had spent money directly in front of me, presumably giggling at the fact that I never challenged it. What about this flat? My flat. They had not just kept it from me, I had to pay the price for it. Rent, utilities, everything, every month. Living in a location that was legally mine, I had been working non-stop at that cafe, making the most of every dollar. I felt like I was slapped in the face by the lease agreement's harsh irony. Mom's voice was hardly audible. "Janice, we must accomplish things correctly. I have extremely specific tastes in these things. Everything must be appropriately filed and documented." I laughed harshly about paperwork, and it reverberated around the empty flat. Except evidently when I told her daughter that she had inherited an entire flat from her grandma. She had somehow forgotten that small detail. The more I considered it, the more memories came flooding back, each assuming a new, sinister significance. Mom had often reminded me that the rent was due, how she would give me a lesson on responsibility while I paid for a flat that was legally mine, the way she would grin as I thanked her for the great rent offer. She had also threatened to evict me from my own flat only a few hours prior. I carefully took pictures of each page of the will with my trembling hands. Before sending it to my mother, I checked that every word was readable and clear. The message displayed as sent right away, and 2 blue check marks followed a few seconds later. She had witnessed it. I gazed at the screen of my phone, observing the appearance and disappearance of those 3 dots. Appear and disappear. My mother, who is normally so quick to respond and always prepared with an answer for anything, was speechless. She was sitting there, practically visible to me, most likely at her kitchen table, desperately attempting to spin this. 20, 10, 30. The dots continued to form and disappear like a panicked Morse code. Every time they showed up, I stiffened, anticipating her reaction. I was grimly satisfied every time they vanished. Allow her to wriggle. It was nearly precisely an hour later when my phone finally rang. I took a long breath before replying. "Janice, dear?" In an attempt to smooth over a problem, she used a tone that was artificially calm. "It's not what you believe." "Really?" "Because I believe that to be precisely what I believe." As though I hadn't said anything, she went on. "I've been meaning to tell you about this for so long. I simply couldn't find the ideal time. However, you can now have the flat since you learnt about it. You own it. Let's just forget about this whole unpleasant business and start fresh." I gave a hard laugh. "Make a new beginning. You want me to just forget everything? Forget that you had Grandma's will for me. Ignore the fact that only a few hours ago you attempted to evict me from my flat. Forget that I have been paying you rent for a flat that is truly mine for nearly 2 years. Please, Janice." "No, Mother. I want my money back in full. I've paid you rent each and every time. I want everything to return." The other end of the queue was silent for a moment. When she resumed her speech, the sweetness was gone from her voice. "Wouldn't I dare? Would you? You would sue your own mother after everything you've done to me, despite everything we've done for you. You mean you tried to evict me when I refused to let Anna freeload here, took my inheritance, and forced me to pay rent on my own property? I would dare then." I ended the call. I opened my banking app with shaking hands and began looking through my transaction history. 23 months of rent payments, each one meticulously documented. Mom had always complimented me on my ability to keep records. In a strange turn of events, I took out my emergency savings book and began making calculations without having to pay rent. I could actually afford to hire a lawyer, a good one. Since the day I moved into this flat, I have been keeping track of every receipt, bank statement, and piece of paper pertaining to it. The law office was quiet and professional, with dark wooden furniture and walls lined with legal books. I sat across from Miss Roberts watching as she reviewed the documents. I brought everything I could find, including the will, my rental agreements, and bank statements that detailed all of my payments. "This is quite straightforward," she said, looking up from the papers. Her expression was a mixture of sympathy and professional interest. "Your grandmother clearly left you this apartment in her will. Your mother had no legal right to collect rent from you or anyone else." I leaned forward. "So what can I do?" "You're entitled to compensation," she said, pulling out a legal pad. "Not just for the 23 months you've been paying rent, but also for the 2 years before that, when your mother was renting it to other tenants." We spent the next hour going through calculations. Miss Roberts was methodical, breaking down everything month by month. The regular rent payments you made, plus the rent your mother collected from previous tenants, she wrote. Numbers adding columns, taking into account the market rates at the time. More calculations followed. When she finally pushed the paper toward me, I had to blink twice at the number $58,640, she said. "We'll round it to $60,000 for simplicity." I felt slightly dizzy that much. She nodded, then added, "We could also pursue interest charges. Your parents have essentially been using an interest-free loan of your money for nearly 4 years. We could calculate standard interest rates." "No," I interrupted. "Just the rent money. That's sufficient." After finalizing the paperwork, I called my mother from the law office parking lot. My voice was steadier than I expected. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you come to the apartment tomorrow? Bring the property documents." There was a long pause before she agreed. The next morning, I heard her key in the lock. She came in looking nervous, clutching a manila envelope. "I brought the ownership papers," she said, trying to smile. "Everything's here to transfer the apartment to your name. I've already had them prepared." She spread the documents on the kitchen table, the same table where she'd made me sign that rental agreement so many months ago. I didn't miss the irony. "Janice, honey," she said softly, pushing the papers toward me. "I know I made a terrible mistake. I'm asking for your forgiveness. Please don't be angry with me. We can put this behind us." And I cut her off by sliding another document across the table. The demand letter my lawyer had prepared. "You have 2 weeks to pay back the $60,000 you took from me." The instant my mother finished reading the demand letter, all semblance of guilt evaporated. She sprang up from her chair with such power that crushed to the floor, and then the screaming began. "You ungrateful little witch!" she shrieked. "How dare you do this to your own mother?" The roar bounced off the walls so forcefully that I think I saw pieces of plaster dust drop down from the ceiling. The neighbors must have believed someone was being killed. I forced myself to keep calm. "You may yell all you want, Mama. It doesn't alter anything. Either you pay what you owe me or I'll file a lawsuit. Consider it. Fraud charges, legal expenses. You're standing in the neighborhood. You have an option." Pictures shook on the walls as she slammed the door shut as she rushed out of the flat. She was still yelling when I heard her marching down the hallway. I assumed that was the last thing I would do for the day. I was mistaken. Within an hour, the calls began to come in. First, it was my father. How could you harm us like this? He made a demand. After all that we have done for you, you are a scumbag of a child. I laughed resentfully, scrupulous and inconsiderate. Coming from parents that deceived their own daughter into paying rent for a flat she owned, that's a lot of money. When you were cashing my monthly rent payments, where was your conscience? I hung up, but he spluttered something about commitment to family. Anna followed. She cried out, "You're going to ruin everything. My parents won't be able to pay for my college if they have to give you all that money. Do you want it that way? To ruin my future?" "I don't care about your future, Anna. You might want to try what I did, get a job, put in a lot of effort, save money, novel notion, I know." The calls continued. Mom would cry and yell at the same time. Dad would give lectures about respect, duty, and family. Anna would manipulate and guilt trip. From dawn to night, they alternated in tag-teaming me. After I banned their numbers, they occasionally called from various phones. My father phoned in a different tone after a week of this. His voice was heavy as he said, "We need more time. Please give us a month rather than 2 weeks." I thought about it. A month was still reasonable, the lawyer had told me. All right, a month. Not another day. The following 4 weeks were calm, strangely silent. No more guilt trips, no more calls. Stop yelling. I nearly became concerned that they were plotting something. However, I checked my bank account precisely 1 month after my mother's breakdown in my kitchen. The whole $60,000 transfer was there. 3 months have passed since the funds first showed up in my account. Last week, I received a call from my Aunt Carol. For once, I appreciated her urge to share facts, even if she has always been the family gossip. She informed me that in order to repay you, your parents had to obtain a bank loan. Her tone was a combination of interest and worry. They are currently having a lot of trouble making the payments. I listened as she spoke on while I sat on my grandmother's couch. Anna is no longer enrolled at college. The tuition is beyond their means. She waited, perhaps anticipating my expression of regret or guilt. She's simply sitting at home whining about how you destroyed her life. I thought about Anna, who had never worked a day in her life, who had always expected everything to be handed to her. Maybe it's time she learned to stand on her own feet, I added. That's when a recollection hit me, so obvious. It felt like watching a movie, The Day of the Reading by Woolf. I had been preparing to accompany my mother to the notary's office. I would dress in my finest black gown, attempting to project an air of maturity and responsibility. Then Mom came into my room looking anxious. "Anna is ill. She had claimed to have a fever. You must remain at home with her." I recall being let down, but I came to terms with it as simply another sacrifice for my sister. I now realize that Anna was most likely not ill at all. It was just another lie in a long line of deceptions, another manipulation. Why my mother stole my inheritance is not the question that haunts me at night. I know what greed is. How she got away with it so easy is what baffles me. Carol didn't know anything about the notary when I questioned her about it, but her explanation makes logical. Most likely, the notary just trusted my mother's promise to provide the family access to the will. To give the impression that she was bringing everything home to show us, Mom may have even brought a stack of paperwork. How many small moments now feel contaminated is the hardest part. Mom often complimented me on my financial responsibility. When she demanded that official leasing agreement, was she secretly laughing? Was she proud of her cleverness? Did she and Dad discuss their deception over dinner? Did they give themselves a pat on the back for their brilliant scheme? It's still my grandmother's flat, my flat. The place feels different now that I'm not paying rent on something I previously owned. The money that used to go to Mom each month is now being saved. Sometimes I glance at my bank account and grin, thinking about how different things are today. The cafe where I work offered me a promotion to assistant manager last week. Some people might think I don't need the job anymore. Now that I'm not paying rent, but I've learnt the value of being independent, of having my own money that nobody can take from me. Their names still occasionally pop up on my phone. Anna, Dad, Mom. They continue to try from new numbers even after I block them. I erase their voicemails without listening. What were they going to say? Apologies. We stole your inheritance. We apologize for forcing you to pay rent on your own house. Apologies. We just got caught when some books landed on your head. I'm fine most of the time. I study in the evenings, work my hours at the cafe, and attend classes. I've done some redecoration in an effort to make the flat feel less like a crime scene and more like my own place. But occasionally, typically in the middle of the night, the rage returns. The years of deception and the casual cruelty of having me believe my grandma hadn't cared enough to leave me anything were just as bad as the theft. My therapist thinks it's natural to feel this way. It's not just about the flat or the money, she argues. It's about treachery, family, and trust. She's helping me work through it, teaching me how to maintain my composure and equilibrium when the memories seem like they could overwhelm me. I've established a new custom. Every Sunday morning, I sit in Grandma's old reading chair by the window, drinking coffee from her favorite cup. I reflect about her, how she trusted me to look after this home and how she wanted me to have it. I feel connected to her once more during those times, as if she somehow knows that the truth has finally been revealed.